All right, welcome to Northpointe Plus. This is podcast number 74, and I'm Kim. I'm your guest host today, and this is Rick, our lead pastor. So, hey, Rick, how you doing today?
I am well, Miss Kim. How are you?
Good. I'm doing well, too. Thank you.
Thanks. Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. Love chatting with you. And I love the message I've already shared with you. It's a little convicting to me and good. I want to go a little bit deeper. So, but before we do that, why don't you give us an overview, especially for those that are watching today that maybe didn't see the full teaching yesterday.
Yeah, so we started a new series called Disappointed. All of us deal with disappointment over and over and over and over again, and we disappoint others. And so we're going to be talking about different aspects of who we're disappointed with over the next several weeks. Yesterday we talked about being disappointed in our closest relationships, so being disappointed with our spouse, with our kids, with our friends, that kind of thing. And the big picture really was our disappointment our disappointment comes at the crossroads of unmet expectations and hurt or pain. That most of the time when you take a step back and really analyze and say, okay, why am I disappointed? It's because I thought things were going to go one way and they didn't happen. I thought my spouse was going to act this way and they didn't. I thought I was going to experience these circumstances and I didn't, and it makes me disappointed. And oftentimes that leads to anger. Disappointment leads to discouragement to depression, lots of times to despair. One of the pictures that I thought that just has made a ton of sense to me was that discouragement is the dam that stops the streams of living water from Jesus running through our lives. It just blocks it up.
Wow, that is so true.
So and then we talked about how to deal with when you're discouraged, what kind of steps to take. Well, I think we'll probably talk more about that, but the importance of looking to God to fulfill our expectations. You can't expect other people to do what only God can do. That we have to be grateful. That's really the key. We'll talk more about that, I think, in the questions that come, and that we've just got to get better at communication about what our expectations are.
I think that's one of the keys, right?
Yeah.
And I love that. I know you focused a little bit yesterday on spouses, but you also said it's really the closest relationships, those people that are closest to us. And I could so relate to all of that. It is the people that are closest to me that I tend to be disappointed in because I have higher expectations or expectations that I think they should know. I think they see what's here, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the disconnect. And I think just one thing I'm going to add to this as well. I loved that you said that disappointment is the intersection between the hurt and the unmet expectations. And I think then that disappointment becomes kind of our perception of reality.
Yeah.
But perception is reality in the mind of the beholder. Because the way I'm perceiving it is my reality. It's not really necessarily what happened, right? But then when we hold on to that disappointment as reality, even though it's only a perception, I think that's where we get hung up and we get blinded to our own assumptions, like I said.
Yeah.
I get in trouble when I make those assumptions of my husband, especially because that's my closest relationship. So I could relate to the spouse. But we do have some questions from people from all different angles, from parents and so forth. So let's just start off. I think the first one comes from a mom. Yeah. And this person says, I'm assuming it's a she since it's a mom. So I understood that we shouldn't expect our loved ones to do things that they aren't skilled to do. But so how do we set those expectations for our teens and adult children to gain skills as they mature? She says, I always thought that part of my role as a mom was to raise them to gain some reasonable skills as they mature, such as to clean up after themselves. Yeah, we always, Why would we expect that? But yeah, right. I mean, and especially as adults, you think, okay, I taught them right, and they don't for whatever reason. So I'm glad it's not just me. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
But to gain employment, some other examples, to complete education, to help out at home. But so when they don't do these things, I think what this mom is saying, it causes conflict with, we start feeling disappointed. We start feeling like we own that, like it was our failure, right? So how do we do that? How do we raise kids or I guess it's really more, how do we communicate in this, right?
Yeah, one of the things I want to clarify in this question, I think that it's great in this question, is that there's a difference between our disappointment from unmet expectations with our kids, with our teens, and with them as young adults. And I do want to go back and just say that disappointment really, when you just said it's at the intersection of hurt and unmet expectations, there are a lot of times that we have expectations and they don't get met, and it's like, it's no big deal. I can just go on to the next thing. If I'm working on a project and I've got to have a printer do a job, and the project's got to be done on Friday, on Wednesday, if it's not done, I've got to figure out a different way. And I may be upset about that, but there's not the hurt that comes.
Right.
I've just got to figure out a different way to do it. Yep. The thing about disappointment in relationships especially is that there's hurt that comes in that, because we expected that they would act differently than they do. So I would say about children and teens both, although she didn't talk about younger kids, that still in the teen years, it's a process of training. And so the communication of what the expectations are and the consequences that come when the expectations are not met are more important. The focus is not on my expectations. The focus is on the training. So if you're all the time thinking, yeah, my kid's going to make mistakes, they're going to mess up, but I've got to talk them through. I've got to structure consequences. I've got to do whatever it takes to help them be wise, because there's going to come a day that they're no longer at home, they're on their own, and they've got to deal with stuff. And that leads to the second part of the question, or at least the implication in there, that they had older kids that were creating disappointment. And I think to a large degree, when our kids leave our home and are out of our direct responsibility, that our expectations for what they do with their life and how they make their decision and all that stuff, we've just got to give that to God. Frankly, it doesn't matter what I want my son or daughter to do at that point, whether I want them to clean in their room or have a clean house or apartment or whatever. It doesn't matter. That's not my deal. And so it really is, in the diagram that I showed in the message, it really is about lowering your expectations at that point and just letting them be who they are, and know that they're going to have the consequences that come with that, whether it's a messy home or, driving too fast or whatever it is. So I think there's a difference between teens and adult kids. And the way to handle that with the older ones is to recognize that God still allows you to have a voice in their life, but the expectations that you have for that, for their behavior, for their response to what your expectation, you got to let that go. I would look back over lots of relationships, lots of people I've talked to over the last bunch of years, and there are adults who are paralyzed or have dysfunctional relationships with their parents because they've got a mom or a dad that age 60 is still making them feel guilty for not meeting the parents' expectations. And as parents, we've just got to let that go.
Yeah.
We've got to lower the expectations.
Yeah. I mean, I remember clearly when my kids got to that point where I'm like, okay, and if they would come to me for certain things, it's like, it's between you and God now. I'm not, I mean, yes, I've parented you, but I'm done parenting.
Right.
Now.
Yeah.
And what you do really isn't it's not my responsibility anymore. And that's not easy, It's
hard. It's hard to let it go, especially if your wiring is such that, that you're living for that relationship with your kids. To let them go is a tough thing. I mean, I'm just checking it to see if there's any thing else I want to say in that. Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. All right,
good.
Well, let's
good question.
Then. Yeah. So the next question says, what do we do when we feel like we've built our life on a foundation of people being disappointing, and how do we turn it around when it feels like it's all we know or we've experienced it? I was thinking about that too. It can be a cycle, right? To get into this, whatever person it might be, well, it's just, and that resentment starts building up and you've got that cycle, right?
Yeah. When your life is structured that everything that you see is a disappointment, you have expectations, and people don't meet that, and it causes pain for you. That's a tough place to be. And I do think that's for many, man, that's where this message really gets dicey, because you can have lots of broken relationships, or lots of relationships that are less healthy than they could be, because you expect to be disappointed, and those expectations get fulfilled. If that makes any sense.
Self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Yeah. I'm going to be disappointed, therefore I am.
That's right. So how do you deal with that? Right. And when I first read the question, my immediate response was, well, therapy. Go see a counselor, have them help you with that process. But the things that were in the message, I think, are really, really critical in terms of how you deal with that if you've experienced disappointment. One is you can't expect anybody else to do what only God can. Only God can fill our deepest needs. And so when we really get that, when we really embrace that, it changes the way that we see the world. And secondarily, I absolutely believe that the easiest way to combat disappointment is to begin to be grateful, to begin to look for the good, to hunt the good in the person that you have the relationship with, in the circumstances that are around you. Because if you look for if you look for disappointment, you'll find it. If you look for strengths and good stuff, you'll find it. And so there's a real challenge in there that I think, to adopt an optimism that comes as a result of recognizing, no matter what the circumstances are around me, God really is in charge. He sits on the throne, and that's good. And that's why I said it's funny as I construct messages, because my bent, the messages that I love to prepare probably the most are to just take scripture and exegete it, to just say, okay, what's this saying? There are times that I think topical messages like this are really what we need to hear, and to structure that in such a way that scripture really shines through. Sometimes it can get lost in all the other things that we say. But Philippians 4, I think those two verses in Philippians 4, 6 and 7 are really keys in, present your requests to God with thanksgiving. Don't be anxious about anything, but present your requests to God with thanksgiving. That really is the recipe for how you begin to look with eyes that don't look for disappointment, but that look for God to come through.
I was thinking about the praise too, like he inhabits the praises of
his people. Yeah.
And that does break things off. I mean, he teaches us that because he knows that once we start being thankful and focusing on him, that disappointment, that depression, because you did mention also that disappointment can kind of lead us down the path to depression. And I actually just had a woman in one of my groups recently who admitted that. She just said, God convicted me of my own sin of being complaining and being depressed, and I'm doing it to myself because I'm focusing on that rather than him. But once I started putting my eyes on him, it started breaking off, so it is, there's a lot to be said for, and I loved that you mentioned this yesterday too, the Philippians 4, because it is to submit your petitions to God with thanksgiving. That is key. You can't just skip past that. Yeah.
And 2 Corinthians, I wish I could tell you chapter and verse, but to take captive every thought. That really what, scripture, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. The stuff that we dwell on takes control of us. And so we look for the good, or we look for the things that are going to disappoint us. And that's a choice that we make.
Right. And those those patterns of expectations, right? So, I mean, I think I've got a pretty good relationship with my husband. We've been married for 33 years, going on 34.
Woohoo.
Yeah. And today's standards, that's a long time, right?
Yeah.
And we have a lot of fun, but sometimes our communication is challenging because we're very different style communicators. And God is showing me I'm probably a little bit prideful because I think I'm a pretty good communicator. That's like my job is in communicating.
Yeah.
And so what I've realized, though, I'm a terrible communicator when it comes to my husband. And I've had this flipped all these years thinking, what's wrong with you? Realizing I make so many assumptions and I don't speak my assumptions, expecting him to understand where I'm coming from. And so you also mentioned therapy. I've gotten to a point where I decided I am going to, put a stake in the ground, and I am talking to a therapist, and I said my whole goal is I want to be a better communicator, not just with my husband, which is one of my most important, but with a lot of all my important relationships.
Right.
So I don't think there's anything wrong with that either.
No.
And I did choose a biblical, Christian counselor because to me that's very important.
Yep.
There's I want to make sure I'm grounded in Scripture. And it's just been awesome. I've really enjoyed that. Not everyone can do that, but there are resources for people. If, some employers may have, a program, if that's something that you really, I'm sure we have folks around here who come alongside you and encourage you in Scripture.
And we have a list of counselors that we know that we've got a relationship with that either people from Northpointe or people that we know have had great experiences with, and we make that available. All you have to do is shoot me an email, shoot Jake an email.
Wonderful.
We'll send that out. Yeah.
Good. I just think that's important that we throw those resources because I'm sure that I'm not the only person that was struck by this and is both convicted and encouraged because, we need the conviction to make change and we need to be encouraged to keep making the change.
Yeah.
And I was thinking on the way in too, kind of related to this question about, because this person said, building this foundation of being disappointment. And I was kind of thinking building this foundation of patterns or habits of responding in the same old way, right?
Right.
And I was thinking, well, how do we, just break off and start new? And I loved your example of the toothpaste, as simple as it sounds. To me, that's a perfect example of we're going to break off our old habits of trying to, your expectations were, you wanted it a certain way. Deb probably could care less. She's like, what's wrong with you? It's just a tube of toothpaste.
She didn't care.
Right? So you couldn't come to the same. Yeah. So, okay, well, let's stop this madness. 2 sets of toothpaste. Yeah. I love it because I feel like that you didn't keep up that cycle of expectations of disappointment. You set up a new way. You each got, you each got your own tube of toothpaste. And to me, that's simple, smart, and a seamless tube of toothpaste. The other one sounds like it might be a little crumpled up.
That's right.
But again, I know it's not always going to be that simple, right, with relationships and with habits. But if we could figure out God's frame of how we respond, then we can break the old cycle.
Yeah. Let me talk some more about in the diagram that I set up, the skills and abilities. Communication is a part of what goes into the skills and abilities. So just being able to talk about stuff and talk about what your expectations are and talk about how they can be realized or talk about whether they're not that significant. Sometimes when you talk about it, it's like, oh, really? We're having an argument about toothpaste? There's got to be a better way to do this. And so to work on that end of it as well. But so much of what we're talking about is in ourselves lowering our expectations with the people that we love, and that's hard. This is not anything that we plan to talk about, but I just was thinking about this in my family. If I talk about me, I'm when I'm with Deb, when I'm with the kids, when I'm with the grandkids. My preference would be that we do stuff, that's how I express love, how I feel love, to do stuff together, whether that's to go sledding, whether that's to play a game, whether that's to go someplace, go out to eat, whatever it is. Deb's wiring is such that she would rather we just sit and talk and catch up. Mm-hmm. And I have to make a choice about whether I'm going to be disappointed in a visit because we don't go and do things, or whether I'm going to lower my expectations and say, you know what, if we go do something, that's great. If we don't go do something, that's great too. When I lower my expectations, the visit's wonderful. But if in my mind I'm thinking, oh, we're going to do this and this and this and this, and those things don't happen, then it's like, well, that was a waste. And it wasn't really a waste at all, but my expectations weren't realized, those unmet expectations and the hurt that comes with that. If I lower my expectations, I'm the one who wins in that because I'm not carrying that hurt.
Great example. I think that's a great example. A lot of people can relate to too. The love language is sort of
it fits in there somewhere.
Yeah. So the next one says, what if you have expectations for your relationships based on the Bible which are not fulfilled? And what if you expect not perfection necessarily, but your spouse to be faithful or your children to be obedient?
Let's see. Ask the question again. My brain.
I know we're going a lot of different places. I know. So
okay.
If you have expectations for your relationship in these biblical expectations, right, for these relationships, and you expect that your spouse is going to be faithful and your children are going to be obedient, I guess, and those aren't necessarily the way it goes. A couple of different things. If I can clarify again the difference between our relationship with our spouse and our relationship with our kids. Sometimes I think that our disappointment with our kids, it just comes because we have the wrong perspective. Our role as parents is not for the kids to measure up to our standards. Our role as the parents is to teach and train our kids. And that means that we come alongside them in their failures. And much of the time, what we would say their failures are really our failures because we haven't taught them, we haven't trained them, we haven't had the conversations that we need. Like the example you gave with the foster.
With my foster nephew.
And your dad recognizing that and teaching him. Here's an opportunity to teach. And
it makes a lifetime difference. So oftentimes parents are most disappointed in their kids about their grades. Well, is that really an issue to be disappointed about? I think if we're able to take a step back and really look and say, okay, what are the skills, abilities? What are those things that fit along with that? You know what? Maybe the reason your kid has bad grades is because they have an eyesight problem. They can't see the board or that kind of thing. Or maybe it's that their teacher is teaching visually and they're an auditory learner. Or maybe it is just they don't care about that subject. It's not that they're dumb. Right. They just aren't invested in that. And our role as parents, I think, is to come alongside our kids and feed them and help shape them, help them process things, to know that God made them special and unique, and to not do their homework for them. That there are skills that they have to learn through that whole process, but to not have expectations that are unrealistic for them in their environment. When I went to school, my expectation for myself was that in every class I would get an A. That was my expectation from the time I was young. I would just get straight A's all the time. And part of that was because my mom and dad fed that, not in a bad way, but when I was young, I talked about, Cincinnati Reds. When I was in 4th or 5th grade, the local paper ran a thing that if you got straight A's, you got free tickets to 3 Reds games. And to me, that was like, as an achiever kind of guy, that was like, oh, this is the best thing ever. And then in the winter, it was you could get free tickets to the Dayton Gems hockey team if you got straight A's. So I was straight A's. That was my standard for myself. That's not a fair expectation for my kids. It's just not, because they're wired differently, and they are not. Their minds, their hearts aren't structured the same way I am. And for me, as my kids got older, it really was, I've got to let go of this because that's not what matters. What matters is that they can learn What matters is that they can read and write and do math, and that they can pursue the things that God has wired them to do. And if I can help them do that, that's so much better than having a 4.0. It's so much better than having grades that are artificial, an artificial measurement of really how they're doing. Yeah. The other part of that question, and this is one of the things I struggled with the message is, okay, how does the diagram, expectations, skills, levels, abilities, intensity, conflict, how does that apply when you've got somebody who has an affair? When they step outside of God's will, and your expectation is that they're going to be faithful. That's a healthy expectation. That's a vow that they made. How do you deal with that? And the thing that I would say in the context of that, again, in taking a step back and looking at the disappointment that we feel in the context of that, is to recognize that we are all sinners, that we all sin, and God extends grace to us. There are consequences for our sin that looks differently. I would be more concerned about the broken trust than the disappointment, than the hurt. And so in that context, saying, I'm so disappointed in you, that doesn't make progress in terms of healing or reconciliation or any of the things that happen when somebody commits a crime. It's not so much about the disappointment. It really is, okay, can I still extend grace? Can I extend grace to this person that I know and love in the same way that I would extend grace to somebody that I met for the first time that did the exact same thing? Because we all are desperate for God's grace.
And I think this next question kind of maybe...
Did I blend them together?
It may be blended together because it's some of the examples, but let's just go there. So please clarify the concepts presented are circumstantial. So you can only lower your expectations to what would be fair and reasonable. So for example, if the person you are disappointed in has committed a crime or betrayal, you would have never lowered your expectations enough. So in this case, no amount of adjusting your expectations, skills, or communication level would avoid the disappointment. I think that's kind of what you were getting at here.
Yeah. And again, disappointment, when we're disappointed, that's all about us. Disappointment is what's in me. That's separate than when somebody commits a crime, when somebody betrays trust, confidence, that kind of stuff. In terms of how do you repair that? How does God work through that? That's a completely different issue than dealing with the disappointment that we have. And I think that when we take a step back and say, yeah, I may not have done that, but I've done this instead, and I still am desperate for God's forgiveness in me for that. I'm still desperate for that person's forgiveness. And sometimes it's really hard because we have high standards for the people that we love. And being able to let go of that allows us to be healthier spiritually, and to really focus on what's critical in terms of extending love, extending grace, and sometimes consequence. There are consequences that come because of the actions that you take. But the disappointment is all about me. It's not about what they've done.
Yeah, that's a good distinction, I think. Yeah. Well, we're going back to kids in this next question. So how do I know if my expectation for my kids are too high? Because sometimes I think they might be too low. How do I find the balance of correct expectations for a 5-year-old?
That's a great question. And without spending tons and tons of time on it, I would let you know as a parent, if you're listening, watching, whatever, outside the kids area at the C entrance on the wall, there is we have a lot of literature that talks about developmental characteristics of children at each age. And those are great tools that come from Orange Curriculum that say, okay, at 5 years old, this is what your kid is going through. This is what they should be able to do developmentally, cognitively, spiritually, what's going on. Being aware of those things allows us to help parent and to have realistic, not unrealistic expectations. And the challenge for us as parents, I think, is to think progressively. I think one of the things that I probably learned that was most valuable from my parents is that they said often to me when I was growing up, our job is to have you that when you leave home that you're ready to go and you're ready to enter the world, that you've got the skills that you need to, and that you're able to process opportunities and challenges in a way that honors God and that you're an adult. So that means for me, growing up, there was a progressive sense of responsibility within the house. I had different responsibilities when I was 3, 4, 5-year-olds than I did when I was 12, 13, 14. I had different responsibilities when I was 16 to 18 than I had when I was 12 to 14. And the expectations for me in terms of contributing to the household, not financially, but contributing emotionally, help-wise, all those kinds of things, there was a progressive sense of that and a progressive sense of freedom. So the time that I had to be I had to be home, by the time I was 18, pretty much it was the kind of thing that Dad would say, hey, if you're going to be out past midnight, call. Just let us know where you are. It wasn't I had to be home by midnight. It was just communicate, and as long as there's a good reason for that, everything's going to be fine. So when I went to college and I went to a Christian college, I went backwards in terms of my the rules. The rules at the Christian college were much more stringent for me, and it was like, this is stupid. I've been able to make wise decisions for the last 5 years. But that wasn't true of everyone. And so as a parent, we have to see our role in terms of preparing our kids ultimately to leave and giving them progressive responsibility and progressive freedom. And we have to figure out how to do that in a way that's appropriate for their development. And our job is to come alongside them so that they can do that, rather than our job being to have them fulfill my expectations for them at that particular age level.
Yeah, that's, again, just going back to that, disappointment really is about us. And so, right.
Yeah.
Focusing on what are we trying to accomplish,
yeah.
Right? I like that. This next one is one that I can relate to too, and it's really kind of, most of the time I'm most disappointed in myself.
Yeah.
What I should have done, especially when it comes to now I have grown children. So thinking, when I hear all these great examples, I'm disappointed that I didn't teach my kids that.
Yeah.
And so before I ask the question, I'm just going to share what I do then is I focus on all the amazing things that are in my kids. And I think, okay, not that I did so great, but even if I didn't do so great, in spite of that, God has equipped them.
Yes.
And they're doing fine, know? And so that and then again, it goes back to praising God for who he is and letting go of the responsibility. And you know what I mean? And then that helps me to get out of that disappointment. Again, that becomes that cycle, and it's kind of a false burden. But anyway, so this question says, what about disappointment in yourself? Like when circumstances have changed outside your control and you can't stop directing your feelings, that you're, letting somebody down, someone close to you down. Your own expectations are normal, but your abilities are currently less than what you used to be able to do. And your frustration is with what seems to be causing the conflict. So you see it happening, but you don't seem to be able to stop it in the moment. What should we do?
I am so grateful for this question because it helps shape the message that comes in 2 weeks. So this week is disappointed with your spouse, disappointed in your closest relationships. This coming week is disappointed with my job.
Okay.
on the 19th, it's disappointed with myself.
Okay, so stay tuned.
So it's a teaser to say I'm not answering that question now.
Good.
But we'll get it on the 19th.
Wonderful. I'll be tuning in too.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay. And the next question here says, so what about when you find yourself adapting to fulfill someone else's unrealistic expectations? What skills can help us avoid that?
So that's a great question, because lots of us live paralyzed by others' expectations. And I think that there's a process where we look at their expectations, and we have to ask ourselves, because sometimes we say, oh, their expectations are unrealistic. And they may be unrealistic only in our minds. They may be like, as a parent or as a boss or whatever, I may say, here are the expectations. And my kid or an employee may say, those are unrealistic. And frankly, they're not unrealistic. They're accurate, but your perception is that they're unrealistic. So the challenge in that is to say, when there are unrealistic, what we would call unrealistic expectations, are there things that I need to do to develop my skills, my abilities, my communication to be able to meet those expectations? So if I've got a parent or an in-law that says that has this expectation that just feels burdensome, it's a really healthy thing to say, okay, what's at the heart of this? And are there things that I can do to help meet that expectation, rather than to just say, oh, that's unrealistic and I'm going to blow them off? Mm-hmm. I think God helps us through that, through the expectations that other people have to grow through that process, and we can't discount that. Mm-hmm. On the flip side of that, I think that a part of that is being able to talk with someone about that. So if our spouse has unrealistic expectations for us, to say, hey, look, I know that that's what you want. We can't do that. And again, if I can go personal in terms of my life, early on in ministry, Deb and I had a conversation, and she said, you are consumed with ministry. Your head's there. You're gone all the time. You're doing all this stuff. And she said, you need to get out of ministry because of that. And the conversation that we had, that I said at that point was, understand, I'm doing ministry, but this is the way I'm wired. And it doesn't matter if I was a school teacher or if I was a businessman, I would be approaching the responsibilities that I have in the exact same way. This is not about ministry. It's about my wiring. Now, my wiring may need to change, but also as a result of that conversation, we made lots of adjustments in terms of our mindset. So there was a sense that it was kind of out of that conversation that we began to say, life is ministry, ministry is life. And so while I was doing ministry in lots of different kinds of environments and situations and time responsibilities, I was also able to create flexibility to be able to not do ministry and to do family, to be family, to have flexibility, to be able to do things. And again, that came out of being able to talk about it. Mm-hmm. But when there are unrealistic expectations, you have to be able to talk about it, and you have to be able to set healthy boundaries, and to be able to stick with that and not be emotional about that, but to just be able to say, yeah, I hear what you're saying. That's not what we're going to do. Here's why we're not going to do that. And to recognize that as far as it's possible with you, live at peace with all men, or parents or in-laws or whoever that is, and to just be able to live that out that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think also, though, if the other person is, if we're perceiving that we're disappointing that person, yeah, right? Like you said as well several times, we can't really change that person's perception, right?
Nope.
But the conversation, I think, is important. It's crucial to open up, and let's maybe even practically write it down. What are your expectations? Instead of assuming that we know each other's, because that's where I get in trouble, is making assumptions that I knew what you meant by what you said. And that's not always the case. It's right. It's translated through all my experiences, not yours. So
it really is that on the diagram, it's raising the skills and abilities, clarifying what the expectations are. And when you, in the communication process, that may bring their expectations down as well as bringing your skill and ability up to lessen the burden of that intensity of conflict.
Very good. Thank you. We got to the last question now. So you said your disappointment is not about your spouse, but it's about you. So if I bring that disappointment to God for healing, what's left to be healed with my partner, or what should be worked through with them?
That's a great question. And, I haven't really kind of said it. This whole topic is just really messy. This is not, ask me a theological question and I can give you a clean answer, because we're all flawed people. So I think that there really is a sense that being able to talk about the unmet expectations and the disappointment, being able to talk about that with your spouse is so critical, because that's where healing can take place in the middle of that. I think when we recognize that our disappointment is about us, it's not about them, that we then have to really take some time and rethink what our expectations are. The example that I just shared about our family and my activity level. There are lots of things. We've been married for 41 years, and there are lots of things at this stage of life that I have to think, I just need to reset my expectations, and it's okay. But my expectations are not necessarily what Deb's expectations are. The way that we handle stuff is differently, and I have to be willing to lower my expectations about stuff that doesn't matter. And she as well. And that really is the picture in terms of marriage, of what makes a great marriage. It is that we make these vows to each other that we're going to love each other no matter what. We're going to do whatever needs to be done. I'm going to be willing to carry her. In times of difficult times, she's going to be willing to carry me, and that means that I'm willing to give up my expectations. I say in virtually every wedding I do, people say marriage is a 50-50 relationship. It's not. It's a 100-100 relationship. 100% of the time, I've got to be willing to lay down my life for Deb. I've got to be willing to lay down my expectations, my desires. I choose to do that. That's what marriage means.
And Deb, we have it here on record.
That's she makes
100% of the time.
Yeah, 100% of the time. She makes the same vow, the same commitment, and are either of us going to do that perfectly? Not at all. And there are going to be times. I say this all the time. There are going to be times that she carries me because I'm just not doing it. That the decisions that she makes is going to carry me through. And there are going to be times that I make that she's struggling and I carry her through. But you can't do that if you have a 50-50 relationship where you say, you got to meet me halfway. It's your turn now. You just can't do that. It really is. Marriage is a selfless commitment to the benefit of the other person, to serve the needs of the other person. That's what God calls us to do. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, hey, I wanted to go back to something you said at the very beginning as we wrap up here, because not everyone knows what, obviously, oftentimes you'll do expository teaching, which is kind of like going verse by verse. Yeah. But this time you mentioned the term exegesis. Is that right?
Yeah, exegesis.
And so explain what that is so our audience knows.
Exegesis is a Greek word that means basically that you take the text and you break it apart, unwrap it, and apply it to where you are. So you look at what was written in original language, try and make sense of that, apply it to where you are. You exegete the truth. You discover the truth that's there, and then share it from there.
kind of topical, like a particular topic, and people can probably dig deeper if they wanted to get into commentary. Sometimes commentary would go that route, but no, and I love both, and I do love that you do expository teaching as well, because it's great to see right where you're getting that from sometimes. But sometimes, like you said, it's such a large topic, you got to mine it from several places, and so we try and create a balance of that. So after Easter, we're going to do a series from Thessalonians. We're going to work through the letters to the Thessalonians. So that'll be fun. All these teasers, I love it.
Yeah, good stuff.
Keep coming back. All right, well, that kind of wraps up episode.
One last thing I just want to share, that for me, it didn't really work into the message, but it is. It's a thought, a foundational thought, I think, in this whole idea of expectations. So I keep thinking about Corrie ten Boom, who was a famous Christian who was in Auschwitz during World War II, and thinking, you know what, for someone who is a follower of Jesus in a concentration camp, what are your expectations? You clearly don't have any expectations of the guards. They're going to treat you like dirt. You don't have any expectations that the system is going to do anything for you. Your expectations are fully focused on God, on His ability to meet your needs, to take care of you day by day. And that's the thing that I think that we miss. Our expectations are so clouded by culture. I deserve to have my needs met, so I expect you to meet my needs. I deserve to have this, so I expect that will happen to me. And that's not what it means to be a follower of Jesus. It really is that we recognize that only God can fill those needs in us. That's what it's really all about. And that's, I think, the challenge for us. We just tend so much to expect people to fill the holes in our lives, and then we're disappointed when they don't. When if you take a step back and think intellectually, you think rationally, they can't.
Right.
They can't.
I don't make myself happy 100% of the time.
Right.
How someone else will do that, right? Yeah.
So that really is the challenge. You can be disappointed, but turn to Jesus, focus on Jesus, and let Him meet those needs.
Thank you. And Corrie ten Boom is a wonderful, powerful example. Yeah. So I appreciate you wrapping with that. So with that is a wrap of episode number 74 of Northpointe Plus. Right. So join us again next week.
Thanks.